Freedom, freedom, freedom. Wow, the cry for freedom. That is something that has just like resonated throughout the 20th century and even the 21st century. It's just everywhere, that cry for freedom. And it's even in our ears, even right now, when you just think about so many places in the world where people's freedoms are being undermined. And that's so much strife for people struggling for freedom. Well, so that's the Catechism wants us to go a little deeper in the beginning of this section to go get to the depths of what that is, that freedom that has just inspired so much action, that has inspired so much, let's say, initiative, that has inspired so much, has mobilized masses and entire nations. Okay, and so that it's really one of the greatest gifts, a huge, incredible gift that God has given us, a consequence of us being created in the image and likeness of God. Is that we have intelligences and we have will. We'll go into that a little more detail. Freedom, though, has often been misunderstood. So we're going to try to go a little deeper, so that when we cry freedom, that we are actually we are longing and we are crying out for what God has in mind when He created us to be like Him, to be free. Well, we're going to break it down in 4 sections: freedom and responsibility. So already here you see how we're kind of understanding freedom in a bigger, sort of a broader perspective. Okay, and we look at dimensions of freedom. That's important because we look at how the word freedom is used. So that will help a bit. I think that's going to help a lot. Then we talk about human freedom in the economy of salvation. This is what God's plan for freedom is for us, for human beings. Okay. And finally, freedom on the moral law. So that is a question a lot of people have. It's huge. That how can I be free if I have to obey? Even simple things. But that everybody, for example, they're in this society, there are laws. Is it that my freedom only goes so far as where the laws begin, or can I be obeying laws that I don't necessarily like or agree with, but not necessarily that they're immoral? Is I free when I obey, do something that that someone asked me to do that I don't necessarily agree with? Wow, we talk about that. Okay, let's go on to the next slide. We're going to start off by speaking of freedom, connecting it to responsibility. Almost like saying that if you want to talk about freedom in the same sentence, we need to speak about responsibility. Okay, let's just put on the table this little definition. What is freedom? Freedom is the power rooted in reason and will to act or not to act, to do this or that, to carry out deliberate actions by oneself. So, we say that freedom is rooted in reason. Now, if you have to choose, it means that you have to understand what your choices are, right? You're going to choose either A or B. And so, why choose A? Well, means that reason means that because it's reasonable. So once we then understand freedom in that context of saying that it is rooted in reason, then it means then that it is, what freedom is really about is about choosing something that is reasonable. And then because we choose it, nobody else chooses it for us, then we are responsible for our choices. So then freedom is then linked. We cannot separate freedom from saying something being reasonable, and then also the fact that action, we are responsible for it. Until man possesses the unique and most perfect good of himself, that is God, then freedom implies the possibility of choosing between good and evil, and therefore to grow in holiness or to offend God. Right? So then to the extent that man then chooses what is good, then we say that is more reasonable. So you see then how freedom and being and reason and rationality, making good decisions, those two things cannot be separated, because then we can also use our freedom to choose evil acts. Okay, and that then would be an abuse of freedom, right? So we want to then, when we speak about freedom in the same sentence, we want to say then, that freedom means it's really the proper exercise of freedom is choosing what is good. To the extent that man does more good, he also becomes freer and therefore perfects himself as a human being. There is no true freedom except in the service of what is good and what is true and what is just. I think we can all relate to that. So that a person, for example, who has a lot of is in society, that person has a lot of responsibility for the development of a country, for example, and that person chooses to do what is best for everyone, to serve others. Another person can choose to be corrupt and just fraudulently just kind of amass the wealth for themselves. So think about that. You say, well, one person is going to be like a hero for the country, is a person who is going to be like a great, almost like a father of the country. If it's if that person is enabled to because of their ability, because of their resources and their authority, they've helped the country to develop, that person, we give them a prize. Okay, now for their contribution. But the person who is just corrupt, you don't give them a prize, you put them in jail. Okay, so think about those two options. Think about those two things. Although which is the proper use of freedom? A person is obviously has perfected themselves, and they're cherished and acknowledged by society when they have worked, to develop a country. And the other person, everybody sort of, when you hear the name, you shake their head. So there's no true freedom except in the service of good, truth, and justice. That's what we're saying. Instead, the choice of disobedience and evil is an abuse of freedom and can lead to the slavery of sin. In this slide, we're going to take a look at the dimensions of freedom. Okay, what do we mean by that? Freedom is a word, and like words are used in different contexts and mean different things. Okay, so on human freedom, on one hand, sometimes we use that word to mean freedom from coercion, and that is freedom to carry out externally what one has decided upon without impediments from outside agents. For example, freedom of expression, so that a person, is free to, a person is free then to express themselves regarding their opinions about, what color they think they should paint the house, or they think that which roads they think that better should be built, or a person can express their opinions about things in their neighborhood, things that concern their family, about vacations, about where to go, where not to go, how to secure oneself, and plans with family, friends, the games they want to play. Okay, you just say, but you say what you want, what you think is best, what should we do, how should our community, where should we spend the money, whatever. So that is freedom from coercion. There's also freedom of choice, or psychological freedom, and this connotes the absence of an internal need to choose one thing or another, right? So here we're referring to the freedom to do something, not just the freedom that you aren't coerced, like if you aren't, like, nobody's twisting your hand, okay, to say, well, keep quiet, right? Okay, it's not that. It is rather that sometimes some people are bound interiorly by, it could be some, for example, addictions, for example, some people by fear, they're just staying in the house, they don't leave. There could be, because of fear, there are persons who just, there could be a fear of, just, people just don't take the initiative, fear of failure, don't take initiative to maybe, do something, or, or take initiative at all. So there are these interior fears because of security, emotionally, needs for this exaggerated needs for affirmation that drive persons to behave in a certain way, and that is we can say there's a compromise. The person's freedom is compromised. So freedom of choice or psychological freedom denotes kind of emotional health. There's no perfect mental health situation, but let's say an average mental health situation. Means that denotes sort of psychological freedom. So free of addictions and things like dependencies and things like that. Now, what we have been speaking about in the last one is really here. Is the moral sense. In the moral sense, freedom refers to the capacity to love the truest human good. So remember last time we were speaking more about freedom in terms of choice, reason, in terms of what is truly good for the human person. And then also and on the other side, moving away from what is evil and what destroys the human person. Okay, so this is very important. Now we say that that Christ won for us the freedom of the children of God. Now, in the moral sense that we have been talking about, also the other two senses are also important, and that is why we are talking about the dimensions of freedom. For a person to exercise freedom in the moral sense, to be able to reason and then choose, they need to be free from coercion, and there need to be freedom of choice or psychological freedom. And this prepares the way then for a person to be able to live moral freedom. So freedom from external coercion, from internal necessity, and from disordered passions. It's in a word, full human freedom has a great value, because only then can we love what is truly good, and then we can enter in loving relationships and truly able to give ourselves. And that is how we can truly love God as the greatest good. And by doing that, we imitate divine love. So because God gives us His grace to love as He loved. His commandments, love. The new commandment I give you, love one another as I have loved you. But freedom is needed to love on all those three levels, so we can attain the end to which we are created. Thus, we can say that authentic freedom then is a sign of the image of God in man. And so freedom is something we have to work on all the time to try to be more free. So that external things that are coercion, there's sometimes we're limited to how much we can be free ourselves from that. But psychological freedom are things that we can work on by acquiring good habits. And then there's, in that sense, there is also moral freedom is implied there as well, because we are then, by trying to apply good habits, we are trying to do what is truly good and acquire ease and to do what is good, and that is, we feel more free when we can say we have a virtuous life. On account of the original fall, the freedom that man has received from God became subject to the slavery of sin. So that's why as we're saying, freedom is something we have to try to conquer and attain. We only will attain our full freedom in heaven. But it was not completely lost. So that's what that apparently the Protestants say, that because of how the man, he was so broken because of original sin, that he cannot really fully perform free acts. There's always some mingling of evil. But the church has said no, that freedom was not completely lost. So then that we, by struggle and with grace, we can actually, and that's what our goal in life is to actually create a greater degree of freedom constantly. And that is we progress towards holiness. By His glorious cross, announced and prepared for in the Old Testament, Christ has won salvation for all men. He redeemed them from sin, the sin that held them in bondage. By cooperating with the grace that God gives through Christ, man can enjoy the higher freedom of being children of God. So this is then free to act in a whole new way, knowing that we can enjoy God's forgiveness, knowing that we have His grace, knowing that we have the gifts of the Holy Spirit. So this is the freedom now to become now kind of have a new life, which is a life of God Himself. So that is why sometimes we can express the whole reason for our Christian faith, or to summarize it, the essence for our Christian faith. It is to live this new freedom, the freedom that Christ won for us to be children of God. Okay, let's dive a little deeper into the idea of freedom related to responsibility. In other words, that I am the owner of my actions, and so therefore I am responsible for them. So it is only because we are free that we are responsible for our actions. Animals, they are determined by instinct, so they aren't responsible for their actions. If you're passing by, for someone's gate and the dog is in the road, the guy's dog is in the road for whatever reason, and bites you, you'd be very angry. But ultimately, you would say, well, you had a responsibility to tie your dogs, so the dog isn't like taken to court, right? say, okay, he's called the dog, here you go, I'm calling the police for the dog. You know? Okay, because again, that the actions are not conscious, and they're not voluntary, right? So they aren't, in a sense that they're not free. Okay, that's really interesting when you think about it. Now we can break that down into two things. We can say that action is free when there's full awareness of an action, and also that there's full consent. So what this means when we say full awareness of an action, it means that we know what the action is that we're doing in terms of how, if it's how good it is and evil it is, in regarding our end, our goal. So for example, let us suppose that somebody does something. Full awareness. Let's say, somebody is, let's say, is at a table, and you are serving someone else, right? You're fully aware of what you're doing. There's another person who's here, and that you're serving them, and you're doing it because it's a friend. So you're aware of what you're doing, and you give full consent, and so then that's a free action. Now, sometimes a person may not be fully aware. Like the other day, my aunt told me that she was there was a scam, somebody through internet pretending that it was a Microsoft, whatever it is, and it was just so well done that she gave them information that she should not have. Now, she should not have done that, but she was not aware, you see, of that. So she's not responsible, you can say, in the sense that she was tricked. So people will tell her, you have to be more careful next time, and things like that. So if her actions affected other people, she will have to maybe help. She'd have to somehow try to amend that situation. But it was not because she was guilty of doing something wrong. I don't know if you see the difference. Because there was not that full awareness, so it wasn't an exercise of true freedom. Now, similarly, we have to give full consent. Now, consent means that you choose to do something. A person cannot give full consent if they are being forced. So if someone is like, twist your hand, for example, this time makes you to tell a lie. You're aware that you're saying something that could be deceive another person, but it's not, you're not consenting to it because you're being forced. So then the conditions for a free act are then two: that fully aware and full consent. That's very important for us to keep in mind. It's helpful for when we're speaking to persons who, like, for example, are a little scrupulous, because at times, their thoughts are just so sometimes crazy, but they're not really full consent to it, because sometimes something happened in your mind that you're not in control of. Your imagination and your memory, these are things that triggers that could be from how you moved, how you slept. It could be from somebody's voice. It could be a smell. It could be the devil. So that knowing how to distinguish full awareness and full consent can help a person to understand a bit, what's happening with them, and not feel guilty for things that are just happening to them, rather than not than what they're doing. So those are two different things. The one thing should be happening to you, the other thing that you're actually doing. And what you're doing is free. What is happening to you, you're not free. You're not responsible for that. In relation to the merits or sins and the effects and consequences, we see that every act directly willed, every act that has those two characteristics that is fully aware and fully consent, can be attributed to the author of it, because that author is the owner of it, and that person is responsible for their actions. Now, an action can be, there's a fancy terminology here. We speak of an action being indirectly voluntary when it results from a negligence regarding what should have been known or done. So that's a little different. So we spoke about the case where somebody was deceived, so that they're not fully aware. Now, sometimes a person not aware. For example, there's a traffic code. Trinidad sometimes is really tricky. It says, between 6 a.m. and 8 a.m. no entry. A person who's not accustomed to driving past there, just go straight. Now, the police stops them and say, I wasn't aware. Yes, true, but there is an indirect voluntary there, in the sense that we should be attentive to the signs and what they say. A no entry sign is a big no entry sign. Just if you said, I passed there, I've been driving past here, but you have to look at the times too. It's not that no entry sign is just, it is not important. Okay, so we need to, there's some things that we should know about, so that we cannot just say, okay, like, oh my gosh, I was supposed to be online for an interview for a job, but I was late. I mixed up the time. Okay, you should have known and checked again and again. You mixed it up, so yes, when you came there, like, oh, I didn't realize. It's true, but there's indirect voluntary, because it's something that we should have known and checked. So, okay, so then we are in a way responsible for those actions, because these are things that we should have known, and that we should have taken into account. Okay, I hope I think those examples kind of, you can understand what we mean by when we say indirect voluntary. The right to the exercise of freedom is a requirement of the dignity of the human person. Okay, so that is very important. Of course, it's all right. Our intelligence that defines us, and so then freedom is so important. An act that is not done freely is not a truly human act. And then what is most important, which we're speaking about, is love. Love requires a person to be free. And virtue, there's no real virtue if a person is not free. A person can be forced to be acting virtually. Let's say, that if they'll just, because they'll be punished, if they aren't, let's say, regular in terms of submitting something. Okay, now maybe they might be doing that, but a person, okay, who a person can feel forced by regularly submitting. Okay, let's say a list of persons who entered the store today, and keeping track of that. They could feel that, okay, I don't want to do it because I feel threatened because I will lose my job. But another person can feel that, I'm doing this because I want the enterprise to work well. Okay, so this information is good for, it's important for security, for the security of the people who are here. Okay, just making sure everybody signs in, signs out, whatever. Being okay with common sense. But doing your job well, you don't feel like this job is constraining me, so that you can do that thing and do it freely. Right now, so people need to. Is a requirement for the dignity of human person that we do our actions freedom, and that people be free from coercion, unnecessary coercion. That is so important, and especially in moral and religious matters. That is so important. That sometimes we say, oh well, that's going to mass or things like that. A person, they're free to choose their schedules. So people should be allowed to choose their schedules so that they can fulfill their obligations of work and their duties towards neighbors and family and so on, in a way that they can still then exercise their religious duties, such as going to mass and praying. Okay, everybody can do that. When somebody asks you to do something, they say, okay, when's the best time? Well, similarly, we have to allow people to have and to make time for their religious observations, and even though we don't share them, and that is so important. That is part of respecting a person's freedom, and so a person should never be persecuted or to be said that, oh, you're not contributing because you make time to go to mass. That, okay, it's like, hey, I make time for mass, for exercise, everything, and so that it is, we need to allow people to be free. You use that time to be whatever waste. I'm using it for my religious observances, so that's fine. And that should be respected, and that is very important. And it should be recognized civilly as well, which means the laws of the country should recognize that and recognize religious freedom. Well, of course, within the limits of the common good, and also